Shalom uvracha from Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. This evening we have the privilege of studying together with the help of Hashem the continuation of the first Mishna in the second chapter of Pirkei Avot, the second chapter of the Ethics of the Fathers, continuation of Mishnah 1. We're learning the teachings of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, known as in our Mishnah as Rabbi, and we left off last class before the following words. Those people following, it's about 4 lines into the text of the standard print here. Vehevei zahir b'mitzvah kalla kibachamura. Rabbi teaches us to be as cautious, to be as careful, to be as scrupulous with mitzvot which we consider to be relatively minor, relatively insignificant, relatively easy, maybe lower level commandments. Hevei zahir. Be as careful with a mitzvah kalla kibahamura. The same way one would be careful with a very stringent commandment. Maybe some commandments, because they're easier to perform, so we don't take them so seriously. And maybe Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is teaching us that all commandments should be taken seriously. All mitzvot are significant. And he continues and he says, She'ein ata yodea matan scharan shel mitzvot. For nowhere explicitly in the Torah does the Torah indicate which mitzvah is more significant, less significant, what the exact reward of each commandment is. Be careful with all of them. Even with those that you may delegate into the category of kala, a minor commandment, a relatively insignificant or easy commandment. Be as careful with that one as with the heavy, stringent, major commandments. Now, I guess the basic teaching of the Mishnah is that all commandments are significant. And it's very, very important to know that. It's very important to relate to all of the commandments. Perhaps a person can choose, maybe even they should choose, a commandment or a series of commandments that they major in. This is their commandment, their particular mitzvah. They enjoy this mitzvah, or they excel in this commandment. But one has to have respect for all the commandments. The mitzvah kalla and the mitzvah hamura. I'm going to quote one of the teachings here of the Tosfot Yom Tov. Rav Yom Tov Heller, one of the classical commentaries on the Mishnah, says, what do you mean, she'ein ata yodea matan secharan shel mitzvot? For you do not know the reward for commandments. He says, we know that certain commandments in the Torah have reward attached to them. The most famous probably is the example of the 10 Commandments. It says, honor your father and your mother. L'ma'an yarichun yamecha. It says, L'ma'an yarichun yamecha. It says explicitly that you'll have a length of days. It says, if a person is careful with scrupulous, honest weights and measures, there'll be a special blessing of length of days. Other commandments, shiluach hakein. What do you mean, matan scharan shel mitzvot? We do know matan scharan shel mitzvot. So the Tosfot Yom Tov suggests that even though it does say by certain commandments, certain levels of reward, it doesn't necessarily mean that the reward for those commandments is greater than the reward for other commandments. It could be that in certain commandments, it is the man yitav lach, the harach tayamim. It'll be good for you. You'll have length. That's true. But maybe there are other commandments which don't necessarily bring arichut yamim, do not necessarily bring length of days, but which can supersede and go beyond the levels of these commandments. Maybe there are other commandments whose reward is even greater. Just because it says a reward by this commandment does not necessarily mean that other commandments, if there's a reward in the world to come, maybe those commandments are even more significant. And even though he says, Tosfot Yom Tov, anyone interested should study the Tosfot Yom Tov on our Mishnah. He says, but we learn in Pirkei in Masechet Peah. Part of that is quoted in our daily prayers in certain liturgical orders where they say the blessings of the Torah, and then they quote a section from Masechet Peah. Elu dvarim she'en lahem shiur. Elu dvarim, Peah. There's certain Elu dvarim. Then we quote a certain early teaching. Elu dvarim she'adam ochel perotehem ba'olam hazeh. Akaren kayemet lo l'olam haba. We have a long list of certain special commandments where a person reaps benefits even in this world, and the principle remains for the next world. He says that's true, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the reward is greater than other commandments. It's very humbling. It's very humbling because, sometimes a person feels, okay, this commandment is not really that important. This is a significant, this is a really serious one. And Rabbi, one of the greatest teachers of Torah and world history, teaches us to respect all of them. And respect all of them equally, all of them with the same level of diligence. There's a fascinating comment here in the Rambam's commentary on the Mishnah. The fascinating comment in the Rambam's Perush HaMishnayot. And I have thought about this comment many times. I'm not sure I fully understand it, but I want to quote it. And the great viewers and the great students here, and the great teachers here, maybe each one can understand it the way he or she understands. Because if I had to give examples of mitzvah kala kebachamura, I'll quote the Rambam, and it's just so interesting what he chooses as an example of mitzvot which people take lightly, or commandments which are easy, or commandments which are, seemingly not so significant. It says the Rambam, and I quote, "Achakach amar shetzarich lizaher b'mitzvah sheyachashov ba shehi kala." The person has to be cautious with the commandment that the person perceives to be light, to be insignificant, or minor. And then he gives two examples. Now, the two examples that he gives are fascinating because he puts the two examples on the same category. He says, Kisimchat aregel, as the example of being happy on the holiday. There's a biblical commandment, the samachta b'chagecha. Now, some people think, samachta b'chagecha, that's not someone be happy. Be happy. That's, I am happy, I'm not happy. He is happy, she is happy, she's not happy. They don't take that very seriously. But that's as much of a biblical commandment as anything else is. You should be happy on the holiday. There's a question on how can you legislate happiness. One cannot press a button and feel happy. Maybe it means that a person should try to be involved in the kinds of activities which bring him or her happiness, or maybe involved in the pursuit of proper levels of happiness. Interesting that's the Rambam's first example. His second example is even more. He says, and then he says, Uchil midat. He says, V'chil midat l'shon hakodesh. And also the commandment of learning Hebrew. The commandment of learning Hebrew, which people seem to take lightly, and a person should be as careful with the mitzvah kala of the midat l'shon hakodesh as they are with the examples he gives us. As with commandments that you understand how serious they are, kemilah, v'tzitzit, like circumcision, and then the tzitzit string, shchitat haPesach, and then offering the Paschal. He puts the commandment of limidat l'shon hakodesh on the same list with Brit Milah and with tzitzit and with slaughtering Pesach and with Simchat HaRegel. Is there a commandment in the Torah to learn Hebrew? Well, this passage in the Rambam, unless I'm misunderstanding it, and I'm surely open to what? Am I reading it incorrectly? That's what he says here. L'midat l'shon hakodesh. Where does it say in the Torah that one has to study Hebrew? One has to learn Hebrew? Is it? I mean, if it's a a tool to understand the Torah, which some people suggest, that she shouldn't speak about Limidat Lashon HaKodesh, she should speak about Talmud Torah. Or maybe people take Talmud Torah seriously, but they don't take Limidat Lashon HaKodesh seriously. Anyone have an insight? Where's their command? It says in the Torah, Limidat Lashon HaKodesh. Where does it say this in the Torah? Limidat Lashon HaKodesh? Anybody? I mean, is this V'dibarta bam? You shall speak in its language of the Torah. One place seems to comment about speaking in Hebrew, that maybe bam means in the language of Torah. I find this Rambam fascinating. Limidat Lashon HaKodesh. That there is a special idea which he considers certain people to take lightly. Learning the holy language, learning Hebrew. Maybe you can't understand Torah without learning Hebrew. And maybe some people feel, I will study Torah, and I don't have to learn Hebrew. Why are you giving me lessons in Lashon HaKodesh? That's not what I have to know. I have to know the concepts, the philosophy of Torah. Not Limidat Lashon HaKodesh. So I understand this word. I don't understand this word. I can translate this. Limidat Lashon HaKodesh. That would fit maybe mitzvah kala, but this is surely a passage to consider. I'm interested. Just one second. A very fascinating concept in my Maimonidean teaching. I have in front of me a very beautiful work that's been published many years ago here in Yerushalayim by a great rabbi that lives in Sanhedrin Merchevet. His name is Rabbi Yitzchak Frank. May Hashem bless him. He wrote a book called Grammar for Gemara. Grammar for Gemara. I guess the play on the word grammar and Gemara sound more or less the same. Grammar for Gemara. And in his introduction, he quotes a fascinating teaching from the author of the Pri Megadim. The author of the Pri Megadim, Rav Yosef Tuamim, who in his introduction to Orach Chaim, the Pri Megadim is one of the serious, one of the serious halachic works of the 18th century. I mean, serious students of Code of Jewish Law study Pri Megadim. He writes in his Hakdama to Orach Chaim. I wrote it down here in my notes. The Hakdama Orach Chaim, if you're interested, it's in Igeret Aleph Ot Tetvav, paragraph 15 of the first letter, Igeret Aleph, the first essay there. He says that when a person is learning, first of all, he says that a person should learn Tanakh every day. Yilmad shiur Tanakh b'chol yom. A person should study Tanakh every day. V'sifrei musar and okay. And then he says, v'chochmat hadikduk. I just read about this great rabbi here in Yerushalayim. Maybe it's Rabbi Ben Ilau, who started the campaign that everyone should study a chapter of Tanakh every day. How many chapters in Tanakh? 924 maybe? Something like that. He calls it the club, the 924 club. I could be off by some 935 or how many prokim are there in Tanakh? And maybe someone could Google it for our. Can someone just look how many chapters in Tanakh? I think 924. But I saw a sign today actually, and how everybody should learn a chapter a day. It's beautiful. So it says the Pri Megadim every day you should learn a little Tanakh, and then he says. The chokhmat hadikduk hu pina la Torah, and a cornerstone for Torah study. A very important aspect of Torah is learning proper Hebrew grammar, which would fit, I believe, one of the messages that Rambam is imparting about Lemidat Lashon HaKodesh. Uvilomei, listen to this. I wish it would be implemented in all the yeshivot. Maybe it is, but I didn't see it. Uvilomei shiur Gemara. When you're studying a session in Talmud, yeh gam kein lefanav sifrei dikduk. You should have in front of it. That's a beautiful introduction to a book on grammar for Gemara, obviously, right? What? What did you say? No, not Nogeh. That's Pri Megadim, right? Yeh gam kein lefanav sifrei dikduk. I mean, how can you analyze a Talmudic discussion if you don't know the rules of Hebrew grammar? You won't understand the nuances of what they're saying. You live on a very dikduk, l'man yeda, ma hu omer, you know, and make sure that you're understanding it properly. It's interesting to study his work. I mean, the great rabbis of our tradition carefully studied Hebrew. Interesting that the Rambam chooses. You wanted to say something? I'm so sorry. Can you speak louder? I don't think it'll be picked
Lashon
up.
HaKodesh perhaps means that if you have Lashon HaKodesh, then you're part of Klal Yisrael because you're all speaking with each other, you're communicating, there's an Achdut. Lashon HaKodesh, Al-Pi Drush, is perhaps Ladino and Yiddish, that you're able to extend yourself out. For the whole thing is there's a unity of Klal Yisrael, that the people have their own language. That's an essential component. Sometimes if to say something in a certain way that the non-Jews would not understand, you're able to say this, you'll have survival and you'll have unity coming together, the two things, unity and survival.
Two comments. I think your comment is very well taken, and I think it's important and is surely on the pathway to truth. However, the very examples that you're giving indicate that since those two languages, each one being used in a different community, the people speaking Yiddish are not speaking Ladino, or did not speak Ladino. The people speaking Ladino did not speak Yiddish, so it's only a partially unifying factor where maybe Lashon HaKodesh is the...
Unifying in their country.
In their country, right?
Yes.
But where would the Rambam get this idea that this is a mitzvah? Where does it say it's a mitzvah? L'midah, not even speaking. It doesn't say Dibur Lashon
It had to
HaKodesh.
do with the Geula. That was one of the things. They had the language.
Shalosh Shinu et Lashonah.
Yes. They kept
What's
the-
L'midat? L'midat Lashon HaKodesh sounds as if... I mean, if I had to give a course in Hebrew, I did teach Dikduk at least once in my life, many years ago in New York.
Because the fact
I had the privilege of trying to teach Dikduk in a great yeshiva. I remember I walked in the first day, and I said I was going to teach grammar. Like 25 faces fall to the. I tried my best for an entire year. I mean, I love Hebrew grammar. I don't know it, but I surely like to know it. I surely like to learn. I'm trying to learn it for many years. L'midah Lashon HaKodesh. It's a very holy endeavor. But the Rambam puts it in the same level. Simchat HaRegel. Simchat HaRegel says explicitly in the Torah. This is a puzzle to me. I don't have the answer. I know that there was a sefer published called Hadikduk Ki Yisod B'Halacha. The Dikduk is a foundational element in understanding halacha. A whole sefer that was published by Mossad Rav Kook. But how many of the teachings of the rabbis are based on nuances of Hebrew grammar, and you won't understand them unless you understand the grammatical structure of those particular sentences. She'en ata yodea matan scharan shel mitzvot. Let's try one more line. I don't think we're going to be able to finish the Mishnah, but please, one more line. V'hevei mehashev. Rabbi continues and says, V'hevei mehashev hefseid mitzvah kineged sechara u'schar avera kineged hefseidah. And a person should calculate the loss of a mitzvah in contrast to the reward that's given for a mitzvah, and should calculate the Mishnah uses the word schar avera. It's a very unusual word, right? Schar avera. I know very few people today who would use those words. Schar avera. Schar avera. There is no, God does not give reward for sins, right? What is schar avera? So, Rashi, the Rav, means they say it means the benefits, the pleasure. There's a certain schar avera. Why are people involved in negative activities? Precisely because there is a certain lure of either enjoyment, of pleasure, of gain. So Rabbi is teaching, calculate. How much is one losing by doing a mitzvah? Losing by doing a mitzvah. I mean, there's a term that that some people would never even consider saying. What do you mean? You could say he means there is no hefseid mitzvah, but I'm not sure that's what he's saying. I mean, he says havei mechashev, calculate carefully. Try to figure out hefseid mitzvah keneged schara. You think you're going to lose something by doing the mitzvah? Well, even if you are, then calculate how much you're going to gain by doing this mitzvah, and you'll see that even if you lose something, it's worth it. Right? I think that's his teaching. Yes.
In the beginning, he says that we don't know the schar, so how can we calculate?
Even if we don't know the sachar of one toward in comparison to the other, but we know that there's great reward for all of the commandments. Any given commandment, right? Any given commandment. There's a hefseid mitzvah. There's a mitzvah to be honest. Yes, the mitzvah to be honest. So maybe a person feels, well, if I'm honest, and I really report all my income, so I lose on my tax income, on my tax form. Hefseid mitzvah. Okay, maybe you lose, right? But can I get schara? How much do you gain? It doesn't matter whether that schar is bigger or smaller than other. There's tremendous reward for fulfillment of all commandments. I think when it says ein hatayodeh scharan shel mitzvot, it doesn't mean we don't know whether there is reward. One of the 13 basic principles of faith is schar. There is reward for fulfillment of commandments. But havei mechashev hefsei mitzvah. I think the term is a fascinating term, because it's almost saying that there is such a thing as hefseid mitzvah. Whereas, do we have? Is this accepted that there's a hefseid mitzvah? Hefseid mitzvah. I mean, isn't it generally understood you don't lose anything by doing a mitzvah?
Okay. The long run, maybe, but
what?
It costs money. It costs a lot of money to keep mitzvahs.
Hefseid mitzvah, kosher, right? Kosher. A person pays X amount for non-kosher meat, and maybe double that in certain parts of the world. Yes, maybe even more for kosher meat. So they're losing money seemingly, or tefillin costs many hundreds of dollars, maybe $1,000, maybe $2,000. So it's hefseid. There's a certain law. You talk about financial law. Can they get schara even if a person pays a great deal? So but they should realize how great is the reward. And I know that we're Baruch Hashem. We're in the middle of Shemitah here in the Holy Land of Eretz Yisrael. Those people here are, I'm sure, ever so sensitive to Shemitah, to Shviyit. I'm sure it's true about the entire Jewish community all throughout the world, but we feel it with special emphasis here in Eretz Yisrael. Let's say someone feels, how can I not work my field for an entire year? What kind of losses I'm going to incur, God forbid, in my agricultural endeavors. So something along those lines. But there's a blessing in the Torah, no? But tziviti et birchati lachem va'asat et hatevua l'shlosh hashanim. But maybe on a seemingly, there are people who think that if they close their stores, they close their businesses, if they don't have their practice running on Shabbat, then they'll lose customers, they'll lose clients, they'll lose patients. Okay, perhaps, but havei mechashev, is it worth it? Uschar avera keneged hefseidah. Uschar avera, very unusual term. Let's say it really feels good to do this sin. Let's say it's really pleasurable to be involved in this sin. Let's say it seems to really bring in great revenue to do this sin. A person could cheat, a person could be dishonest, a person could lie, a person schar avera. There's God forbid, a person can go against certain laws and seemingly feel that they're gaining, even if that's true. Of course, it doesn't really work in the ultimate sense. But that's what bothers me. Are you following what bothers me about this word? Is the Mishnah? Is this an admission of the Mishnah that there really is schar avera? Is that yes?
Could be.
Can you speak louder? I can hear you, but I don't think they can.
Could be that it's also like so sometimes you need to do a avera to because it's Eslas Lashem, like I don't know what, maybe.
Yeah, the Gemara gives an example of writing down Torah Shabbat. Yeah, that's the.
Yeah, or Shlomo Karlbach was doing sometimes things because Eslas Lashem, and it was good. It was a good thing, but maybe I don't know. And also by mitzvah, it's a mitzvah, let's say, I don't know, to punish someone. But this person that do this mitzvah, he defect himself because Hashem will punish him back.
So how do you fit that into the words? Schar avera keneged hefseda. Which havei mechashev hefsed mitzvah keneged schara. I'm trying to say what you're saying. Uschar avera keneged hefseda. That's an example of schar avera.
Schar mitzvah, it could be like if you're mitzvah somebody else because let's say it's a mitzvah. I don't know. You did something. I don't know what, and you think it's a mitzvah. So, but you should know that you will be punished for being mitzvah, even if it's a mitzvah.
Like tzedek turdov. Righteousness shall you pursue. Make sure that when you're pursuing righteousness, pursue it righteously. Okay, so it says here schar avera. The reason why so many people are involved, God forbid, in violation of commandments or in transgression, is because there is a certain kind of temptation, there is a certain kind of sensation connected to sin. Says the Mishnah, even if that's true, realize that it's a trade-off. The schar avera, you may enjoy what you're doing. You know, let's say this cheeseburger is absolutely delicious. Cheeseburger is so tasty and so enjoyable. Could be. It would. Al yomar adam efshi lechol basar v'chalav. Person shouldn't say ugh, meat and milk are so distasteful. Maybe it's very tasty, but realize the schar avera can negative say that what you're losing by carrying this out. I'm sorry we couldn't finish the first Mishnah with the help of Hashem. I hope to be able to complete Mishnah 1 next week. And thank you so much for listening. May each of us find that pathway of a relationship with all the commandments in the proper way, always following all the commandments, even those that seem on one level or another level, and always making the right calculations as to the greatness and the great levels of blessing and reward connected to the fulfillment of God's word. Thank you so much for listening. Shalom.